He fell in love with the estate at Mount Vernon.
He was constantly improving it, correcting it, experimenting with different things. This is where he loved to be. This is where he was most happy, entertaining, enjoying life as a Virginia gentleman.
He was an innovative farmer, surprising his fellow Virginians when he changed from growing the traditional tobacco to wheat. But it made Mount Vernon flourish, and aided by the land he had purchased as a young surveyor, he was becoming a man of significant wealth. A wealth the British were more than willing to tax. And tax heavily. For Washington, it was taxation without representation, and he was not a man to take this lying down.
He seems largely oblivious to what is going on until the very late 1760s, starting around 1770. But once British policy does arouse his attention, right away he rises to the forefront and becomes as radical as anyone very quickly, and then becomes one of the leaders who will help carry Virginia on into the Revolution.
Washington and many other Americans were resentful. They wanted to be part of the British Empire, felt themselves every bit as capable as the top people that were there, and yet they could not win the recognition. As John Adams put it, we will not be their Negroes.
In a letter to a friend, he made his feelings very clear.
At a time when our lordly masters in Great Britain will be satisfied with nothing less than the deprivation of American freedom, it seems highly necessary that something should be done. But the manner of doing it to answer the purpose effectually is the point in question.
The rebellion against British taxes reached its climax in 1773 in Boston, when colonists, unhappy at the taxes being levied on tea, destroyed a cargo belonging to the British East India Company. King George III was furious. "The die is now cast," he wrote to his Prime Minister. "The colonies must either submit or triumph." The following year, prominent Americans from all over the colonies gathered in Philadelphia to discuss the situation. It was decided that a British attack on one colony would be an attack on all, a stance Washington wholeheartedly supported.
Well, Washington is essentially a conservative person, so to go down the road to military resistance is something he's not going to do lightly. As he wrote in one of his letters, "Sad choice indeed, but what choice can an honorable man make? It's better to see the land drenched in blood than to live as a slave."
On the 19th of April, 1775, 700 British soldiers fired upon 77 colonials at Lexington, Massachusetts. Another meeting was called in Philadelphia. Events were unfolding rapidly, and Washington arrived wearing full military uniform. Their message could not have been clearer.
He's trying to make the statement that it is time for America to go to war, and that he's the man to lead America to war.
He has military experience. He is a conservative, respected person, but a dedicated patriot. All these things make him a logical choice.
Washington took command of the Revolution's new force, the Continental Army. Ironically, he now faced an enemy he had once been so desperate to join.
It's really one of the great what-ifs in American history. What if the British had made Washington a Redcoat officer? Then I think when the American Revolution rolls around, Washington would have been a high-ranking officer and he would have been fighting for the British.
As commander of a ragtag militia of 9,000 ill-disciplined men, Washington now had to face the professional army of a superpower. Could his charisma and bravery win the battle for a nation?
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
On the 4th of July, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed. The United States of America had been born, but would have to win her freedom from her colonial masters. At first, the war did not go well for George Washington. In the summer of 1776, with a few thousand enlisted men, he took on the British at New York with disastrous results. There was panic in the American ranks. Thousands deserted, and Washington was left exposed and vulnerable. He escaped with his remaining men under the cover of fog, and was humiliatingly chased across New Jersey.
Some people would be discouraged and give up. Washington had the kind of character, it's almost an indomitable will. Whatever happens, he will fight to the last.
After 6 months of running away, it would be George Washington's genius as a risk-taker that would finally save the day.
The cause was just about expired. Washington's men were about to go home because their enlistments were up. So he really didn't have much choice but to make this attack.
He knows that if he does not do something by the end of the year, as he put it, the game is just about up.
In the dead of night, on Christmas Eve 1776, he took a party of men across the icy waters of the Delaware River. On the other side slept a drunken brigade of Hessians, German mercenaries in the pay of King George. Washington attacked. Morale in the colonies rocketed. Nearly 1,000 Hessians were killed or captured, with a loss of only 2 American lives. But the following winter, Washington's army, camped at Valley Forge outside Philadelphia, had little food and poor clothing. Disease was rife.
Men without clothes to cover their nakedness, without blankets to lay on, without shoes by which their marches might be traced by the blood from their feet.
Washington took great pains to keep his army alive and furloughed as many men as he could so that he didn't have quite so many to feed. It was a tremendously heroic achievement to keep his army together at Valley Forge, even though it was not an especially cold winter by the standards of the time.
The war continued for another 4 years, with battles won and battles lost. But by May 1781, Washington was afraid that American morale was crumbling.
He was afraid that the American cause was going to disintegrate on its own, and that the Americans needed one more final big victory to convince the British to give up the struggle.
The French, happy to help defeat the British, had destroyed the Royal Navy in the Atlantic. With their relief fleet crushed, the British Army, under the command of Lord Cornwallis, was trapped. Washington seized the opportunity and moved his troops with incredible speed toward Yorktown. In the final battle for America's independence, Washington would be the victor.
Washington got incredibly lucky at Yorktown because a lot of things came together and worked perfectly to enable the surrender of the British. But there was a lot of brilliant generalship on Washington's part as well.
George Washington had led his country to victory over